Okay, I'm sat here with Dr. Anna French, who's part of the history team here. What's your formal title in the university?
Yeah, it's a senior lecturer in early modern history in the humanities department here at
Okay, and
Gloucestershire.
by early modern history, that's quite broad, or it could be quite big. What are your research interests?
My particular interests are early modern childhood. So a lot of students ask me when is the early modern period when they first start, because a lot of people don't take it at A level. But we sort of do from about 1450, and I take students right up to about 1660. So that's kind of roughly the early modern period that we cover here. My actual research interests are 16th and 17th century childhood.
Right, so it's the experience of people growing up as children, or the conceptualisation of childhood within that period of time, presumably.
Yeah, within that period of time, I'm particularly interested because I'm sort of a religious and cultural historian, so I'm particularly interested in the impact of religious change and mainly the Reformation on perceptions of children.
I was going to say, that's a huge period in terms of religious change. There's a lot going on then.
Yeah. So it's kind of just narrowing it down to look at how religious change in particular changed from Catholic to Protestant culture.
Of course, yeah.
At the moment, I'm really interested in the changes to the baptism ceremony and what that did to the perceptions of infants in particular, and whether or not they were perceived to be saved or to be born sinful or evil. Yeah. Some of the questions that I'm asking.
So interesting, there's kind of a real connection between what seems like a very little thing like baptism ceremonies and actually having big impact in cultural and historical terms and how people think of things.
Think about childhood in particular, and also about salvation and how to look for signs of your election in your everyday life and things like that. So there's a lot of things that happen in the Reformation that change people's perceptions of spiritual status, and I'm particularly interested in children.
Well, so that's a very kind of interesting research area, and there's lots of questions that I could get distracted for the next half an hour asking about that. But in terms of how that translates into what you do in terms of teaching, and what modules you tend to cover, how would students encounter your work through the course?
Yeah, I try and sort of make my teaching very much informed by my research, and I redesigned my modules quite recently. But like other staff, I start with the first year and then guide students right the way through to level 6, we call it, the third year, and they start with an introductory course to the early modern period, which a lot of students find useful if they haven't done it at A level. And we look from late medieval, Renaissance period, right through to the Reformation, and then into the 17th century, ideas about crises of kingship. So we introduce students to themes of religious, cultural, intellectual, and political history right from the start, so they can choose areas of history they might be interested in terms of the early modern period. And then in the second year, we go on to look at religion, superstition and fear, which is an interdisciplinary module with RP and history.
It's a very popular module. There's a lot of students really keen to come and find out about witchcraft and the things that you really engage with.
We do witchcraft, ghost belief, fairies, and looking at how Catholic and Protestant culture in the 16th and 17th centuries dealt with those ideas.
It's a really kind of engaging material.
Yeah, we use a lot of primary sources, witchcraft pamphlets, providence, prophecy, fortune telling, and it does engage students, and it's a really good way to help students to understand the mindsets of people living in the 16th and 17th centuries that they thought very differently to the way we do now. And by using ideas about superstition, to call it that, you can kind of see how people thought so differently.
So a real kind of opportunity for students to take what you do in terms of a very kind of focused research work, but actually look at it from their kind of more their own learning and their own kind of development as historians themselves.
We encourage students to use primary sources right through to the third year and through to the dissertation to really read extracts taken from that period.
So if students develop a real interest in one of the things they encounter throughout the course, there's the opportunity in the dissertation to really take that into a level of much greater detail.
Yeah, the early modern dissertation seems to be quite popular. We're really lucky because we have access to something called Early English Books Online, which gives students the potential to read a huge amount of published text from the period and then choose a dissertation on a huge range of topics.
So they get to access not just secondary texts about that period, but real material from the period, and work with someone like yourself to actually engage with it and get really behind what the superficial.
Yeah, the kind of documents printed at the time, and a lot of students, I guess, reflecting my own interest, look at life cycle events. So we consider birth, marriage, and death. Texts written about those events.
So ways, I guess, that for many students or many of us in general, they're things that happen to many of us. So we can connect with people who live then through these kind of
these
life
experiences
cycles.
And the way that they experience those times in their life potentially very differently to the way that we do.
So it's going to hurt, but it's a hope to actually uncovering how different that mindset is.
Yeah, that's kind of what history history does. So.
Fantastic. Well,
Yeah.
thank you very much. I could talk to you about kind of a lot of those things for hours, but I better not do things. It's very short profile. But thank you ever so
Thank
much for
you.
talking to us.